Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into the source material to reveal why the most controversial member of the Friends group is actually its most realistic. So, if you think you've got Ross Geller completely figured out, well, prepare to look at him through an entirely new lens.
Because, let's be honest, for decades now, Ross has been heavily defined by just one deafening shout, right? You know the one. But if you're only remembering the 3 divorces, the endless jealousy, and that infamous quote, you are totally missing out on the deepest and honestly most relatable character in the entire series. So today, we are peeling back the layers to see the real Ross.
Section 1. The Misunderstood Friend.
Okay, let's jump right into this and completely reframe exactly what Ross brought to the group when the show first premiered way back in 1994. It is so easy to lose sight of the foundational roles each character was designed to play. I mean, the ensemble was perfectly balanced. Joey had his unshakable confidence, Chandler used sarcasm as his shield, Monica chased absolute perfection, Rachel was on this massive quest for independence, and Phoebe just wholly embraced her own individuality. But Ross? Ross was fundamentally defined by his vulnerability. He was basically the exposed nerve of the group. Which brings us to Section 2, the root of vulnerability. To really wrap our heads around this vulnerability, we have to look at the massive emotional trauma he went through before the story even begins. You just can't understand Ross without understanding his starting line. Look at how incredibly fast his life fell apart. Unlike most sitcom characters whose personalities are just, static comedic traits, Ross carries profound emotional scars. Literally overnight, he lost his imagined future when his wife Carol left him. His marriage ended, his confidence was completely shattered, and he was suddenly thrust into navigating co-parenting. This single timeline quietly explains his deep insecurity, his intense caution, and his overwhelming fear of being abandoned again.
Moving right along to Section 3, Authenticity and Awkwardness.
Let's see how all this builds into his professional and social life, specifically focusing on his unapologetic authenticity. Because, that trauma didn't make him shut down entirely. Instead, it created a highly accomplished yet totally unironic guy. Professionally, Ross is arguably the most accomplished of the 6 friends. He's a paleontologist with a PhD who becomes a professor at New York University. And unlike a lot of sitcom characters who try to hide their nerdy traits, Ross is entirely authentic about his passion. He genuinely loves learning, fossils, and science, and he flat out refuses to hide that enthusiasm just to look cool. It's incredibly admirable. But, as we all know, this rigid authenticity brings a pretty heavy dose of social awkwardness. Because he desperately wants people to be happy and worries intensely about their perception of him, he overthinks absolutely everything. And this leads to a series of painfully relatable questions. Seriously, think about it. Who among us hasn't over-prepared for an important date? And taking it a step further, who hasn't tried just a little too hard to impress someone? We have all been there, rehearsing conversations in our heads, desperately trying to make a good impression, and feeling our heart totally race when things don't go according to the script.
And ultimately, who hasn't made a small mistake that just spiraled completely out of control? Whether it's wearing leather pants on a date and getting stuck in a bathroom, whitening your teeth until they literally glow in the dark, falling asleep in a tanning bed, or screaming pivot at a couch on a tiny staircase, Ross simply experiences our own relatable everyday anxieties on a much larger and obviously much funnier scale. He isn't foolish, he's just trapped in situations where his sheer panic only makes things worse.
Now let's get into Section 4, the Rachel Green dynamic.
So the absolutely crucial point here is how this deep-seated insecurity impacts one of television's most iconic romances ever, his relationship with Rachel Green. Ross had loved Rachel quietly since high school, and when they finally got together, the romance was filled with unforgettable highs, like their first kiss and that sweeping airport reunion, but it was equally defined by heartbreaking lows. After losing Carol, Ross became deeply, deeply afraid of losing Rachel. And his fear transformed into this stifling jealousy, especially regarding her coworker Mark. Instead of honest communication, Ross just let his anxiety take the wheel. He overwhelmed her with attention and completely ignored her need for independence. It is a very real lesson that fear often creates the exact outcome we are desperately trying to avoid.
And this brilliantly illustrates the infamous break argument. The brilliance of this storyline actually isn't about proving who was right. Ross was operating on a legal, literal truth. They agreed to a break, so he thought they were completely broken up. Rachel, on the other hand, was operating on an emotional truth. Regardless of a technicality, she felt deeply, deeply betrayed. This shows exactly how relationships fall apart when two people interpret the exact same event completely differently. The source material points out that the show never provides a perfect answer to this debate because, well, real life rarely does either.
Let's pivot to Section 5, Friendships and Physical Comedy. Beyond romance, his platonic relationships reveal the multi-layered humanity of his character, really pulling him out of his own head and into the ensemble. Each friendship highlights a completely different facet of his personality. With Monica, you get that messy, affectionate sibling rivalry where they compete over childhood memories, but also offer profound support during life's absolute lowest points. With Chandler, it's decades of shared history. Joey brings out his hilarious, awkward side through bizarre apartment adventures. And Phoebe constantly challenges his rigid, scientific worldview with her unconventional beliefs. He can be a deeply supportive brother one moment and a totally frustrated scientist the very next. But we absolutely have to acknowledge a vital truth here. None of these dynamic relationships or awkward disasters would resonate without David Schwimmer's incredible performance. His masterful physical comedy, the nervous voices, the wild facial expressions, the escalating expressive panic, it turns potential irritation into pure, lovable comedy. Without this highly specific performance, a character who makes so many poor decisions driven by jealousy and insecurity could easily become, frankly, unwatchable. Instead, he remains utterly human. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, Finding Real Character Growth. As we examine the final season, we can see a subtle but incredibly meaningful evolution. It's not some sudden, magical transformation, but a quiet, realistic progression. When we map out his journey, the growth is just undeniable. He starts the series in Step 1, completely terrified of losing love, heavily carrying the massive baggage of his failed marriage. In Step 2, over the years, he learns to balance his family responsibilities, becomes a supportive father, and finally learns to respect Rachel's ambitions rather than seeing them as a threat. And by Step 3, in the series finale, instead of hiding his feelings or assuming it's too late as Rachel prepares to leave for Paris, he stops letting fear dictate his choices. He ignores the anxiety, puts it all on the line, and fights honestly for love. This brings us to a really powerful conclusion drawn straight from the source text. Perfection isn't memorable, humanity is. Ross embodies all of our human contradictions. He grows, he regresses, he succeeds, he fails, he learns, and yeah, then he repeats his mistakes. He isn't a flawless fantasy hero. He is deeply flawed, carrying massive emotional baggage, just trying to figure life out, which makes him ultimately deeply human. I really hope this explainer shed some new light on Ross Geller for you today, moving beyond the surface-level jokes to see the vulnerable, authentic character underneath. And it leaves me wondering, based on everything we've just covered, who do you think had the best character arc on television? Think about it. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.